And I'm just grateful that my story is out there in a more permanent sense. But even then, I know it's only transient because in a long enough timeline, this all disappears. But that's the beauty of it. The beauty that things don't last forever. And therefore, you take more time to cherish the fact that it did happen while you were still alive. And therefore, you honor the existence much more because you know that it's not going to last forever. We spoke about serendipities and the people we meet abroad, knowing that we'll never see them again, these temporary entanglements that some people classify as intimate. And whatever definition you want to assign to them, those people who see it as intimate and very profound, it's only because you know that it's so temporary. This is not the person you're going to go home with. This is the person on the train that you will have one amazing conversation with and maybe spend a few hours with or a day with, knowing that once you say goodbye, you go back home and you know that they're not going to be part of it anymore. And that's the energy that you bring, that what makes it so valuable.
Welcome to Be Human, Calvin.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
So Calvin, where I would love to start is talking about a really significant, what you describe as an inflection point in your life of a before and after. And in your beautiful new book, Monsoon Diaries, you speak of the loss of your father and how it kind of brought up this like deepest fear of abandonment. Can you speak more to that sort of inflection point in your life?
It's the first of many inflection points in our lives that I choose to see as more how I define the worst and best summer of my life. Obviously, a definition I assigned looking back and seeing its impact to where it has led me today. At the time, it was like pushing up a boulder all my life. That was like my father, just being that presence, always telling me what I should be and who I should be, not really giving me a choice. The reframing is that he gave me discipline. I'm grateful to him for, some kind of structure, a roof over my head, education, that which I won't take for granted, but also didn't give me the freedom to love, to be myself, to feel love, or to feel an emotional connection with them until his loss. And then when he suddenly died from a heart attack, which is right after like an argument that we had. So it was 1 minute, I thought he was going to like ruin my life, of all the power in the world, to suddenly become powerless, like gone, just like that. He just dropped dead from a sudden heart attack while trying to burn off that stress we had from the argument at a gym a few hours later. And it's like pushing this boulder and it vanishing. And I fall down and I'm looking around and I'm like, what do I do next? And I say it's one of many inflection points because these events that happen to all of us, whether it's the loss of a loved one, or for those of you who haven't experienced that, a pandemic, right? That's something we all experienced. It's something that comes all of a sudden. You could be doing everything right in life, and yet these things will happen, serving as a reminder that you really aren't in control, that real life outside this bubble is chaos. And you're at that point where you can decide whether to keep running away from it, devise all these contraptions and arbitrary things just to keep your life stable in a very unrealistic way, or run towards the chaos and embrace it. And this took me 10 years to reach. I think that's what the habit I developed learning from that experience.
And around this time, I believe you began to learn how to reframe fear. Where were you at that point in your life, and where are you now in relation to fear?
It is the definition of how I approach my life, where fear is my friend. It is something that will always be with me. And rather than trying to ignore that friend, or sometimes it helps to see as a crazy roommate in your head that you cannot evict. It's there with you. It's in your head. You're not going to be able to get rid of it. You might as well love it. You might as well hug it so tightly that this roommate, this fear, now wants to push away itself from you and said, all right. And then actually leaves on its own, because that also could happen. At that time, I was surrounded by discomfort. I didn't know what to do, how to grapple with my father's death. My mother at the time had just been diagnosed with Parkinson's as well. And when this happened, she was off with her parents. She's like, I have to live with them. So I was truly by myself. And a lot of things happened that summer where this constant recurrence of abandonment kept happening to me, where I just let go and said, you know what, it's going to keep happening. I am only 19 years old. I have the rest of my life for all these things to keep happening. I might as well just embrace it and be comfortable with it rather than always trying to run away from it. I got pummeled so bad that the only way was up after that.
Beautiful. And how does travel come into this? To my understanding, in 2010, you took your first trip to Egypt. Can you talk about the fun adventure around that experience?
Oh man, I didn't even want to travel at that time. I hated the concept or idea of traveling.
Wow.
And maybe it was because of fear.
Yeah.
I am a born and raised New Yorker, never left. My undergrad, my uni, my grad school, residency, all was in New York City. And I knew this as a born and raised New Yorker. You've met New Yorkers. We're never going to leave. So I always felt the whole world was going to come to us. If I wanted to go to Korea, I just go to K-Town. If I go to China, I go to Chinatown. If I want to go to, any parts of East Europe, I would go to Brooklyn, Little Odessa. It didn't make sense for me to spend so much money and time in a place I wasn't going to live in anyway. If I already knew the answer was New York, I thought I was grateful for that. And I felt like during winter breaks and summer vacations when everyone else left, I would be like Harry Potter and stay on campus because New York was great. I had the whole city to myself. So how travel came around was so ironic. And I think it was the course of serendipity where I was a bartender at the time. I was 23. It was 2 years after I had graduated college. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to become a doctor or I was meant to become a doctor or I was just happy to become a bartender for the rest of my life because I generally was very happy as a bartender. And by not becoming a doctor, I then felt also was tethered to the influence of my father. Did I not want to become a doctor because of my dad, rebelling against him for the rest of my life? Then it's not really my decision anyway.
Yeah.
But then becoming one, it's then his decision, and it's this runaround. And traveling was what represented it, this serendipity that happened when I was bartending. And there was this customer that didn't leave the bar. And one thing led to another where we chatted, we kept talking, and she invited me to come on her trip flirtatiously, not really serious, to join her in Egypt. It was a family trip. And I did not want to travel at the time. So I kept giving excuses as charmingly as I could without actually saying I didn't like travel, which was, I don't have enough time. I don't have enough money. You're leaving in 2 days. How am I going to join you in the last minute? And in an effort to push her away, but also keep her at the bar, I would say, okay, fine. I'll come with you to Egypt if tickets are under $800.
Yeah.
Some random number. Because there were 2,000 at the time. I liked her enough to check. But it was a good excuse. And I think that's where it stems from, that fear, that excuses that we give.
Yeah.
And the more we do it and the earlier we do it, the more it becomes a habit. So it's very easy for me just to rely on that. But the serendipity struck where later that night, as one thing led to another, and we checked it late, the next morning, you kept hanging out, and then you checked it again, it dropped to $650. And obviously I did not want to go, but I'd rather be, that's a great deal, by the way. Yeah. So I'd rather get a good deal and be a man of my word, rather, and be $650 poorer than start creating a habit of always going against my word and not following through my promises and flaking on even strangers when the promises I make to them.
Right.
And then 36 hours later, I was in Egypt.
Amazing. Absolutely beautiful story. And I love your integrity.
It took me 3 weeks to be dragged kicking and screaming to finally love traveling, because the first week I was like, I hate this. I'm going to die. 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 The second week I was like, I'm still alive. Okay. 3 weeks in, I was like, oh, I get it. Because it was 3 weeks of actually being alone and being by myself without knowing anyone, without anyone knowing me, without being connected to the internet, didn't bring a cell phone, didn't bring a computer. And I didn't really have time to pack. So I only had myself and my day bag and figuring it out on my own. And I couldn't even understand the language of billboards, media, TV, signs. So the only person I could commune with was myself.
Wow.
And before that, it was always connected to other people. So it was not until 3 weeks of being alone where I came back and I was like, I get this. I'm starting to love this, because it was actually a testament. It's like, oh, I can tolerate myself. I am no longer afraid of me alone or myself. And it was just the beginning of a greater journey where I decided to make this a habit.
That reminds me of a moment that you shared about being at Cairo train station, and you felt in that moment that you were truly free. Can you share more about that experience?
What is freedom if not total isolation, but the freedom to do whatever you want as an anonymous stranger? It sounds scary, but true freedom is scary. We all live in a social contract. Wherever you're listening, we're part of some social contract in the society where we give up a little bit of our freedoms for security. And that's okay. Like, I like my internet. I like being able to wake up and have a coffee shop down the street that I can go to and hang out in if I don't want to hang out at home. That's my privilege. That's the security that we have. That's the bubbles we create. But is it true freedom when we make that habits? When I feel like routines have now been put in the position of controlling us rather than the other way around. And we don't really know that we're in full control unless we actually extirpate, destroy these connections temporarily by pulling ourselves into a place where we don't have these attachments anymore. And what better time and place to do that than being in control like a trip? It's a fun form of untethering yourself. You can wait until the loss of a loved one, a breakup, losing your job, getting evicted, all these terrible things that I don't wish upon anyone, but will inevitably happen to any human on this planet. You can wait around for that and be out of control and not knowing what to do, or make a habit of putting yourself in a scenario where you're in control, where it's scary, but you are totally in autonomy of choosing scary. You're choosing chaos. You're intentional chaos that you're embracing. And when you make that a practice through travel, which is much more palatable than waiting around for trauma, then by the time that something bad happens, you're a little more ready and a little more confident in yourself that you can handle it.
And you have a philosophy that's all about sort of dancing in the rain and sort of understanding that the storm always passes. How do you incorporate that into your life?
That you can't change the weather pattern. People complain like, oh, it's raining today, as if it was their fault or as the world was against them. And for one to actually reconcile and say, you know what, I can't control the weather pattern. How comedic was it for me earlier to complain about something I cannot control?
Yeah.
And if you can laugh at that, something that you were angry at first, and then you can somehow get to a point where you can laugh at it a few seconds later, those are low-hanging fruit to practice with, to get you then to see other events that you can practice with and laugh at yourself. Because in the big scheme of things, like the Cairo train station, I was one of hundreds of people, anonymous. No one cared about me. No one looked towards me. No one knew me. And I was but a stranger or a droplet in the fog, is how I wrote it in the book, where I could do anything and be anyone and nobody would care. Yeah. As long as I didn't hurt other people. So just doing things on myself. So when I say invite intentional chaos, I didn't mean for other people. I mean into your own life. Yeah. To invite intentional chaos into your life so you can understand yourself better. And when you dance in the rain, as long as you're not hurting anyone, that's your story. And if when rain comes, you can either choose to run away, as I said, create all these contraptions, find the umbrella, the upside down umbrella, find an awning, running here and there and getting closer and crying about it. Or you can choose just to dance in the rain because you can't control it and might as well enjoy it. I think I wrote, somebody else wrote this and I quoted, whoever said sunshine brings happiness has never danced in the rain.
Beautiful. And I want to talk to you about a state of being. To my understanding, this state of being is a large purpose of why you travel, to experience that true presence. Can you share more about the journey of understanding how important that state of being is to you?
How does one know themselves unless they're in an environment in which they can look back and look outside, step outside their bodies and look back on themselves and see what they're made of and who they truly are? We are a product of our environments. And while we can't really change ourselves so quickly, like sometimes that's an effort that will take years, we are more able to change our environments more liberally. If I don't like something, I can remove myself from an environment that is overwhelming and choose an environment that is more conducive for me to heal. Or on the flip side, if I'm not challenged enough, I feel like I can change my environments pretty quickly to put myself in a place where I can learn and grow more in a sustainable space. For me, that's traveling, to be in a state of being where I can be reflected by the presence of other people that I've never met before. So we have an identity that's pretty controlled at home, whether it's our friends or our loved ones. And our identity is not only defined by what we see in ourselves, but what they see in us, how the reflection it's a back and forth thing. And if you stay in that, that's the state of being that would seem pretty permanent. But sometimes circumstances change, things happen, bad things happen, pandemics happen, where you may feel frustrated with your current state of being, no matter how many wonderful friends and loved ones you have around you. And it doesn't mean you pick the wrong people. It just means that maybe you're not in the mindset to truly appreciate them because your bandwidth has run low, your mana has been depleted. And what better way to reset, to heal that, to fill that cup, than to step away from the painting, look at it from afar and say, oh, I've been so in the weeds looking at the little lines and brushstrokes of everything that I'm not enjoying this painting, that I've forgotten to step back and say, hey, this is a beautiful painting that I'm part of. And that's a physical thing that you do when you travel, when you're in a space where nobody knows you as well. And yet you still make friends in those spaces. You, with a foreigner, or with a local that you stay with, friends at a hostel, people that you rendezvous in a temporary moment, knowing that you'll never see them again, but they see something in you that people back home may not see in you. And you come back much more recharged and refreshed and more appreciative of all the things you've taken for granted at home.
Can you share a story that kind of represents this state of being connected with yourself and others and life, and just kind of, I guess, that sense of truly being alive?
If not the Egypt trip, where this random person at a bar sees something in me that I was capable of travel more than I saw in myself. That's one thing. There's another story. It's a pretty long one, but I will do my best. My first trip after Egypt, my first official trip with the Monsoon Diaries as a travel blogger, I decided to start in Southeast Asia and end in South Asia. So from the Philippines, now weaving my way through and ending in India. And that was a summer before I was supposed to begin medical school. And I had wrote that I wasn't sure if I was meant to be a doctor. I mean, this medical school took me because they actually liked how honest I was, which was, I don't know if I'm meant to be a doctor. I was so honest. It's like kind of like Office Space. Like that Egypt trip inspired me to make another wager, which is apply to every med school and hoping that it would get rejected everywhere and check that box off and knowing that I'm not meant to be a doctor. But then one school took me because they were like, we want someone different.
Wow.
And you present something different to our community. You are the imposter, but we are taking a chance on you, and we believe in you in the ways that you don't believe in yourself. And I'm very grateful to that school. And I also knew that was an opportunity most people will kill for. And I didn't want to take that for granted. So I accepted it, but not knowing if I was deserving of such an acceptance. So I partly wished that trip, something would happen to me, whether I would be left behind or stay behind, or I would die. Knowing that, maybe I'm really not supposed to be a doctor. I didn't really believe in myself because I wasn't so unsure how I got there. Kind of how I feel now about being a published author. And that imposter syndrome will stay with you. That's the running theme of this. They will stay with you, but your attitudes towards that very discrete event, my father's death, imposter syndrome, can change. So during that trip, I was taking a train from Mumbai to Goa, but on the train, I met this family who convinced me to get off the train in Hyderabad. I don't know why, but they were like, you should explore Hyderabad. So I did. I literally got off the train at their behest. Maybe they wanted the room to themselves. And I was off in Hyderabad updating my status, and the Facebook algorithm got it to somebody in Hyderabad who said, hey, you don't remember me, but we met at a birthday party in New York like 2 summers ago.
Wow.
I'm in Hyderabad at this campus. You should stay with me. I was supposed to stay with someone else, but I ended up saying, no, I would have loved to explore Hyderabad, the ISB campus, and stay with my friend later. So I go up to see him, and we have drinks. One thing led to another, and I wake up in the middle of a field, and I was like, what's going on? And then I, decided to board a bus back to Hyderabad from the campus, and there was a sign-in sheet. And I hand this, I wasn't a student, so I didn't know how this worked. So I gave it to the person next to me, and she was like, "You're not from around here, are you?" And we started talking, chatting for about 15 to 20 minutes. And then I was like, "Oh, I need to meet up my friend." So I asked to borrow her phone because I didn't travel with a cell phone at the time. And I called my friend, and my friend picked me up, and that was that. And I remember having lunch with my friend an hour later, and they were like, "Who was that?" I was like, "Oh man, she was super cool actually." And I didn't exchange last names and emails. Oh man, I wish I actually got to know her. She was actually really, really cool. It was kind of like before sunrise or before sunset, but crammed in like 20 minutes with like, and before sunset, they like, well, we were so young and stupid and we didn't exchange last names. That was me. And just as I thought that, the phone rang because caller ID, I forgot because I didn't travel the cell phone, or I forgot the call. You can call the person you just called before without remember their number. She's like, "Hey, I want to hang out." And there's no one to have lunch with. So we ended up hanging out. I was supposed to leave that night to another place, but that bus didn't exist. So I ended up spending an extra day, this time with her, walking around the campus. Very innocent. Nothing happened, just walking and talking until the sunrise. And then I finally left. And I remember waking up the morning after, feeling so sad and at a loss. And again, kicking myself for not getting her contact information again. And I was like, well, this person really did mean a lot to me. And so I blogged about it. And once I blogged about it, a few hours later, she left a comment anonymously, but saying it was lovely meeting you. I knew it was her. And my friend who designed my blog said, "Oh, she actually blogged about you. I saw the IP address that she commented on that you wrote about. She blogged about you."
Wow.
And I looked at that blog, and it's this long 3-paragraph thing about me and what she saw in me, and this fellow human, and the humanity she saw in me, and the way she described was so cerebral. And I knew 2 things after reading that. I have to see her again to ask her, what does it all mean? What do you see in me that other people, and I can't even see? Number 2, I should start and finish medical school. That someone sees a humanity in me that can help other people as a stranger. What more can I bring to the bedside of my future patients to be? So long story short, I was so evoked. My mind was open after that blog. I mean, she didn't leave any contact information in the blog, so there was no way I was going to run into her. But now I knew there was something out there. She spoke into existence. That I spent the rest of my trip in Egypt, the next 2 weeks, just running into people, serendipities. I would meet someone day 1 and I run into them again in day 6 in a completely different city on the other side of the country. And it was happening every day. I ran into like someone I had a crush on in college on the streets of Chennai. And it's like, "Hey, do you want to come on a weekend trip with me?" We go on a bus station, and I was like, I don't know which bus to take. There was hundreds of buses to take. So I pointed the first foreigner, Australian, by the way, that I was like, "Oh, he must be going to the same place we're going to, because that's the only other place that I was going on a whim." And he looks at me, he's like, "Calvin, what are you doing here?" And it was someone I had met right after I posted that blog post. And we ended up going this weekend trip together. He stayed at this hostel that he really loved. We stayed with him. The next morning, I realized I've committed to medical school at this point because of the blog post. So I tried to find my last flight home. So I booked the flight last minute. It was the cheapest one. It was from Chennai to Singapore to Shanghai to New York. And on the way back, I was like, "I just booked my flight. It's leaving tonight. Where are you heading off to?" Jamie is his name. And he's like, "To Singapore." We were on the same flight.
Wow.
And on the same flight, he tells me that, you're in this aura called Sab Kuch Milega, in Hindi for you'll get everything when you travel with this vibe in India. And as we parted in Singapore, he says, "Sab Kuch Milega." And I turn around, and guess who I run into? The girl who wrote the blog post that I met in Hyderabad at customs, looking to me. And my mind was blown. I was like, "What are you doing here in Singapore? We're not even in India anymore." And her name is Nikita. And she walks up to me. She's like, "We can add a few more pages to the fairy tale." She apparently is a business student in Singapore who spent a summer in Hyderabad. Of all the times to come back, it would be around the same time that I would land. And it was also Singapore National Day. So we spent an extra 2 days. And then I finally flew back. And then because I was in this vibe in Shanghai to New York, I run into another friend, my favorite person I ever interviewed for undergrad, who ended up coming on my first group trip for the Monsoon Diaries when I started taking other travelers. So what does it all mean? I don't know, but here we are.
I absolutely love it. I mean, we had this conversation about synchronicities before we even pressed record. So I completely understand. I mean, I shared with you as like, I truly believe when we experience these synchronicities, it is like a message from the universe saying you're on the right path. So it's just so beautiful to hear a story like that, how it's just so common and frequent with you. It just must have been the most amazing and blissful experience.
Especially with the intervention, because most of
Mm,
us close our hearts to these things when we're in some kind of negative space.
yeah,
Whereas when you're looking down all the time, you're not going to see the world around you to pick up on these opportunities.
right.
If you keep your head up, literally and figuratively, you will see those things. And I think I went in not knowing if I was meant to be a doctor, but keeping my heart open to
Mm,
those things. I mean, it could just be chance on chance on chance, but you can either see it as such,
right,
no magic, or you can choose to
right.
see magic in it. And
Yeah.
who's it going to hurt either way? If this is your story, you get to write it however you want it to be. And you're
Mm,
inviting that intentional chaos into yourself without hurting other people. That's magic. Magic is chaos.
yeah.
And may it render meaning to whatever you do so that you can live a better tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether it was Einstein. I know some of these quotes can be sort of misquoted, but I love the quote that is like, you either see everything as a miracle or nothing as a miracle. And it really,
Yeah.
that really speaks to that. It's your choice, whether you believe that it's chance or synchronicity. But I think, as you're suggesting, there is a lot more magic and in the faith that it's something bigger than that.
Yeah, I have a whole page on my blog, monsoondiaries.com/friends, with 7 galleries of people with stories underneath each one of them.
Mm,
There's just too many. I had to document it to prove to myself that this is a consistent thing. That was more the reason than the rhyme than the exception.
yeah.
And then I realized that these random chances of happenstances are not very random at all. It's the energy you bring with it. And it brings a lot of faith into this world that we live in, which otherwise seems totally chaotic
Yeah.
and desperate.
And what did this girl that you speak to, what did she see in you that at the time you didn't see in yourself?
She saw my ability to connect with humans that I didn't give myself enough credit for.
Mm,
That I saw myself as this mopey, melancholic,
mm.
slightly egotistical, narcissistic,
Self-aware?
me, self-aware of my narcissism, just my, woe is me kind of thing.
Mm,
But there was an element in which I communicated with other people that was real, authentic. And
wow.
she spoke to that where she felt heard and seen, even though I thought the whole time I was being selfish.
Wow.
But I think that self-awareness, that the way I was telling my story with that degree of self-awareness that I was talking about myself was in a way that created a connection with what she was going through. It's not
Mm,
about what story you tell, but how you tell it. And when you're connecting with another person and actually showing vulnerability,
mm.
even if the story is about you, you're creating a bond and creating a friendship and a connection with an otherwise total stranger. And when she said that you can do this with complete strangers like myself, and by the way, she's a standoffish, introverted person. She's not someone that makes friends with everyone. She said there was something that I saw in you that made me feel that I could become someone that can help other people. And at the
Wow.
time, I was debating whether to become a doctor. So that was one of those signs that pushed me in that direction to come back alive.
Yeah. And you did become a doctor.
The
And
irony.
yeah. And a lot of your book speaks about your experience of coming into COVID, being a doctor in New York. I would love to know, because I don't want to go into the politics of COVID too much. I'd prefer to sort of go into more the philosophy and what you've learned. Being around so much sort of fear and death, but sort of through your story, also like love and life. What is it that you've sort of taken from this experience of being on the front lines about, I guess, existence and purpose?
The only constant is change.
Mm,
That events happen, they're pretty discreet. And when they happen, they may hurt us. The hurtful ones usually stay with us a little more poignantly. And when we look back, we, or actually, when we look forward, looking back, looking forward, we feel these events will never change and they will stay with us. They're like a permanent scar that we will always regret or rue or just think negative thoughts over. And that's what we feel in the moment. But what I learned from COVID was that while these events will never leave us, our attitudes to those events can change with time, with reflection, with honoring or even grieving it fully and processing these things rather than constantly trying to repress it or ignore it. And by embracing the discomfort and honoring what has happened, in this case, a pandemic that happened to all of us, something that's universal and can be immediately understood by anyone listening to this right now. Regardless of what you went through, it was an event that happened to all of the world. And while that will never change, our attitudes are constantly changing towards it as long as we honor it and process it the way we did and whatever we experienced through it, whoever we know that we lost or whatever we've lost. And that's what defines you as a person, not about discrete things of your X, Y, and Z, and that's permanent. It's how you change and how your attitudes change towards an event as you grow. And it's how you grow that defines you. And that's how I like to define people. It's how you get up from something, how do you learn from something, how you grow from an experience, rather than being locked into this one identity for the rest of your life, or to being defined by a single event for the rest of your life. And we compare it to like a roller coaster. We don't need to know how many loops there were, or if it goes up or it goes down, or it goes left or right, or you're going to get nauseous at this point, or it plateaus or goes high or low. Just enjoy the ride. What better way than to enjoy it and being present for 100% of the roller coaster as much as we can as this pandemic unfolds or dissipates or reoccurs. And I tried to write my book in a way to reassure people, this is not a book about COVID. COVID is just a background character vehicle to really to assign something else that has happened in your life that you can relate to, whether it's COVID, that's the easy way, or something else that was challenging that you can, rather than seeing it as, oh, I need to overcome this, I need to ignore it, I need to repress it, I need to run away from it. Rather than that, to actually see it as an opportunity to reframe your life and re-examine your life with greater clarity and purpose. And that you will succeed and you will live a more fruitful, more clear, a life with clearer eyes and greater purpose because of the event and not in spite of it.
Yeah, one of my mentors spoke about COVID sort of when it initially started happening, and people were sort of talking about this increase in fear. And he was sort of suggesting that, like, it's not necessarily an increase in fear, but sort of like an awareness of the fear that's sort of been ever present within us. And it's an opportunity to kind of develop a better relationship with, I think, what you're speaking to, the sense of uncertainty that is in our lives. You know, no matter how much we try and fight it or suppress it, it's there. And it's about being able to develop a practical and almost spiritual relationship to it, which kind of, for me, I'd love to ask you, because you do speak about this in your book as well, as this idea of faith, because it's sort of one thing to be able to deal with fear and be able to reframe it and have these lessons and growth and gratitude. But there's also this element of faith that I think comes into play into your practice. Can you share more about that?
It's practical faith. It's developing faith through pragmatism rather than blind trust.
Yeah.
Think about what we discussed in the beginning of this episode, was that my father died. He did everything right. I tried to do everything right. Everything was structured for me. And then even you do everything right, death can happen in a blink of an eye without expecting it. That's life. And then we have COVID. You could do everything right and say, I'm going to travel once I get married and have kids, or when I get a promotion, or when I graduate school, and then a pandemic happens. And then you're like, oh, I should have done that earlier. You can do everything right. And then, you know, this thing happened. It just throws your perfectly laid out plans into chaos. And then you have COVID in itself, where so many people were dying, and it was a new virus at the time. We didn't know if we were going to survive. And so many people just dying. And, you know, in New York, we just had no room for all these patients that are coming in. We felt like it was going to collapse. We felt that all of this was meaningless because more pandemics are going to come, more patients are going to come in. So what was the point if everyone's going to die anyway? And then we have travel, the positive way. Well, that's also a very humbling experience. Look, my background, you're in the middle of the desert underneath a sky filled with billions of stars that will only make you feel so insignificant and meaningless when you look up and see how small you are. All your trials and tribulations, all your worries are so insignificant in the cosmic relation to time and space. That's what travel will bring. So if all of these three things only serve to suggest that everything's pretty meaningless, then what's the point? But then you realize that if this belief that everything is meaningless is true, then so must the statement that everything is meaningless is meaningless. Does that make sense? Because if that's the case, then the fight for meaning is ever so more meaningful. The fact that you still go back into that all of us went back into work every day during COVID and to keep treating patients, even though we knew that it was fruitless and we didn't have a cure and many of them were going to die anyway. And when my loved ones, my grandfather died, my colleagues died, we still went in and knowing that it was the only thing we could do to travel, even though it makes us feel small and insignificant. There's some meaning that we derive from that, and all the stories we spoke of earlier and all the people we've met that travel presents to us, even in the face of meaninglessness. Or when my father dies and choosing to see it as both the worst and best summer of my life, that's a choice for me to see as an inflection point to get me to where I am today. The fight for meaning within that meaninglessness, that in the face of meaninglessness, is what makes it meaningful. And that's faith.
Beautiful. I love that. And through my personal experience, I've traveled quite a lot, certainly not as much as you, but I do find traveling for me, it feels easier to find meaning. It feels easier to find it more regularly and frequently. And I know that finding meaning in sort of every single moment of existence for you is important. How do you bring meaning sort of just into the everyday life that you have when you're not traveling?
A constant state of reframing and balance and thinking of the beauty and relevance. I think it does help to have kept a diary and maintain a discipline of blogging often. I don't say every day because I don't blog every day when I'm at home, but when I travel, I do write. And even as mundane as the day was, I still write about that. And the post can reflect the mundaneness. But the fact that I honor the day that otherwise I would not be spending at home because I was traveling, something different, I can look back on it 10 years later, 5 years later, during a pandemic, during the middle of a lockdown. I can relive that day and even enjoy the beauty in that mundane day abroad when I didn't do anything in that random European or Asian or Scandinavian city where I didn't do anything. And being able to just wish I could have another day like that. When at the time when I was writing that, I was like, well, didn't do anything today, to spend a whole day on a bus. Or didn't meet up with anyone, no serendipities today, but maintain a constant practice of blogging about that. When we look back in our home life and say, wow, like this happened and I still honored it with a blog post and a photo, I actually want to be there right now and have that total freedom of not being tethered or bound by, first world problems, another serendipity to be tethered by and follow through. Maybe I just want to hang out by myself, or just being the freedom of having a bus, looking out the window and knowing that you're going to some place without having to move at all from your seat. And when you do that, you look back on your life right now in the everyday home life and realize that's also bloggable. That also is worth writing about if you choose to see it as such. I don't have that much discipline to write about every day when I'm not traveling, but it does reframe the perspective of how valuable your present day is when you make that a practice. For those of you who don't write, it's okay. You do have photos of even the most mundane of times when you were happy. And it doesn't even have to be about travel. It could be about a photo of a random hallway, empty hallway in your high school or your university with your friends. That's something that felt so run of the mill that you decided to take a photo of. You can go through that and use it as a time to realize that you honored the mundanity of it all. Right. You can do the same thing with that right now. And that's the beauty in being the current present. And then you can step outside and make a conscious practice to look at leaves and the sunlight and the way the rays reflect on glass and even rain and say, wow, this is something that happens all the time, but I can choose to see beauty in this.
Beautiful. I love those words, honor the mundane. There's something very powerful in those words that I'll certainly reflect on. And I want to talk to you. You mentioned a concept a Japanese concept to my understanding. I'm not probably going to pronounce it right. But it reads to me as mono no aware.
Yeah. It's funny because I just recorded my audiobook and we were like struggling. And I'm like, all right, I hope this works. So the way the audiobook has been okayed, and I haven't gotten any feedback on by the quality control team. Mono no orare.
Oh, beautiful. That sounds great.
The transience of things, yes.
Yeah. I'd love to sort of like finish up the conversation here in understanding this concept more and what it means to you, because in reading your book, it had such a sort of beautiful presence and energy to it.
Thank you. It's so nice to hear. Thank you for saying that. And it's just one of countless stories that happens to one that travels to deal with the loss of a loved one, someone who went through COVID. Right. This is why I have this huge imposter syndrome. I'm like, why me? Why am I getting published when there's so many other people's stories out there that deserve to be published? And part of it is the transience of these stories that deserve to be heard. And I just so happen to be grateful to be picked to tell one of those stories. But even then, those stories will come and go as the world moves on and doesn't want to think about a pandemic, or has had enough of travel bloggers, or has had enough about grief and loss. I mean, who knows what the world wants to pay attention to? And I'm just grateful that my story is out there in a more permanent sense. But even then, I know it's only transient, because in a long enough timeline, this all disappears. But that's the beauty of it. The beauty that things don't last forever. And therefore, you take more time to cherish the fact that it did happen while you were still alive. And therefore, you honor the existence much more, because you know that it's not going to last forever. We spoke about serendipities and the people we meet abroad, knowing that we'll never see them again. These temporary entanglements that some people classify as intimate. And whatever definition you want to assign to them, those people who see it as intimate and very profound, it's only because you know that it's so temporary. This is not the person you're going to go home with. This is the person on the train that you will have one amazing conversation with and maybe spend a few hours with or a day with, knowing that once you say goodbye, you go back home and you know that they're not going to be part of it anymore. And that's the energy that you bring, that what makes it so valuable. And if you can do that in another person, like this girl Nikita did in me, you can bring that energy to the people around you back home as well. Because you know you're capable of it. That person has awakened that in you to invest in the energy in the transience of things, even you know that it's not going to last forever.
Thank you. Thank you for this beautiful conversation.
No, thank you for getting me to this point, getting us to this point to discuss this in the first place.
Yeah. So I'd love to ask you, Calvin, on a final note, what does it mean to you to be human?
It depends on the kind of person you are, but to be human is to honor who you already are in this moment. That you don't need to be anything or anyone or anywhere to know that you've already are the person you need to be, and to fully invest in the present eternity moment of everything that got you to where you are, everything that you already have, and knowing that's everything that you will ever need to be happy and to be grateful and to live fully and presently. So instead of trying to grasp at things outside of you to define this identity of yours, know that you already have all the tools right underneath your nose, all the experiences that already has happened to count on and define as resilience, as grace, as beauty, as human. And yeah, you already are where you need to be. You've already arrived. The work is not outside of you. The work is within, to see what you already have. Because once you commit to all these little investments in the present moment, because the best gift you can give to the future is investing as much as you can in the present moment, all those little things will add up and create this person that you already are today, and bring and present themselves to you in a more clearer picture. There's nothing bigger than the smallest of things.